All right, so here I'm going to talk a bit about the whole evolution regarding the concept of the soul and a bit on the afterlife. And so to start off with, a key thing in the beginning is to realize that soul is something that never existed in and of itself as something separate from other things. It's always kind of associated with either a person, an object, a place, all right? It always carries that idea that soul represents something extraordinary, an extra presence, an extra power, an extra energy, right? But it's always kind of associated and linked in with something like, a human being or a tree or a particular plant or animal or what have you, okay? So the object is sort of the form that often functions more as a symbol for the power or life force, energy or intelligence, all right, that's associated with it. So there's the soul refers to something that's a deeper essence, that's also a bit of a mystery that is hidden and not really seen, but yet with it is a sense that it's greater somehow. Okay, it's like a greater, higher power. All right. That's a key thing about it, number one. And so this is why you find it quite common that just a mere image, a mere picture of something is held that that picture as a form contains the essence of that which it depicts. And it could be a picture, like a photograph, or I would even say here, it could even be words like your name, right? That is sort of the form that contains the essence, the spiritual essence, all right, that it's a container of. And so this is why in a lot of tribal or primal tribes, it's very much a taboo to ever take a picture of someone, okay? That if you take a picture of them, they believe that you've captured their soul and now you could do things to them. They're in danger. It's like you've grabbed and gotten a hold of some of their soul. Even to look into a mirror or look into water and see your reflection is very much a taboo. It's very dangerous to do that. And so this then ties in, with a lot of magical rituals where you've got voodoo dolls, images of, a doll or a person, or you make a doll of, and you could do things to it. And therefore you've got control over that person. And this is why in the history of religion, we have images of various gods and goddesses and spirits and whatnot, because it's held that those images, those forms, right, they actually contain the energy, the essence, the spirit of that being. And so just, again, as examples, say, for example, in medieval time, lovers would take, say, some blood-stained shirt of their beloved knight that's gone on off to battle, that they'd keep that with them, so that that bit of blood stain on that shirt of their lover is with them, and it's like they've got a part of their soul close by, right? Likewise, there's an Indonesian tribe to ever give, you give clothing or a necklace to a warrior, and when they go out to battle, they've also got some of your energy with them, empowering them, giving them strength. So you've got all these sorts of ideas connected here. And basically we're dealing here with soul stuff, not directly the soul, but that objects of various kinds can contain something that we call soul. And so, as I already mentioned, there's other things associated with soul. Like I mentioned, a person's name is very important, is how the name contains the essence or the soul. And that's such a fundamental concept, even in terms of working magic, is the use of words, and that certain words have power. They're containers of energy and power. And that's why you're never to speak God's name in terms of the Jewish tradition, in the Bible, the Hebrew tradition, right? The name Yahweh is never to be spoken, not to be taken in vain, as though you could potentially try to have power over God, right? So that it has its roots here in this whole idea that names and words have power. They contain the essence of that which they're a symbol of. Likewise, a shadow, a person's shadow. We find a lot of evidence of this. So for example, in India, then the caste system, with what have been known as the untouchables of the lower castes, that even if their shadow touches you, you've been contaminated. It's held that their spiritual energy, essence of who they are, is contained in their shadow as well. Amongst the Greeks, it was believed if you entered the temple of Zeus and would lose your shadow, in doing that, that you could die within a year. There's an Indonesian tribe, when they build a house, their shadow cannot touch the main pillar of that house. Okay, it brings danger to those who live there. Also, if one is ill or faints, there's a tradition that you need to call your soul back, as though there's been some form of soul loss. And again, in shamanism, it's held that a lot of illnesses is associated with a loss of your soul. And anyways, you could babble on about all kinds of things here. Many tribes held that the soul resides in either your pupil or the thumb and the phallus, often called the little man, in certain parts of the body. And I think, I talked about that elsewhere. Oh, no, in a video that you're supposed to watch in terms of, the organs having different parts of your soul. Some hold that, and then in contrast to this, demons, right? Evil spirits and the dead, okay? Also times certain spirit animals, they don't have shadows, but are in a sense themselves shadows, okay? The Greeks called the spirit of the dead living in the underworld shade, okay? And in modern times, I don't know if you've come across this, but there's talk these days here and there of seeing the shadow people, like dark black kind of figures that will show up. And they're generally, more like evil spirits, okay, that can cause problems. They're called the shadow people. Okay, that's some kind of more contemporary folklore, if you like. Oops. Okay. And so, hang on here. Did I skip? Okay, there. Okay. Soul stuff can semi-detach as soul powers. Okay. And so here is the idea that soul powers seem to be a type of transitional bridge between soul stuff, okay, this kind of special energy associated with objects, and what will become the soul that can literally totally be detached and separate from the body, that there's something in between that can be seen as soul power. And again, these are all more very ancient ideas, what I'm talking about here, okay? So for example, in West Africa, there are various tribes there that they fear losing their shadow. To lose their shadow is equal to death. So that means during the middle of the day, when the sun is at high noon, they don't go out, because if they stand directly under the sun, they won't have a shadow, and ta-da, that means they're gone. So it's like they'll be dead. So a part of who they are is in that shadow. But at nighttime, on the other hand, is held to be good to get out, because it's all dark here. And that darkness is a result of the whole world being under the shadow of the great God. And if your shadow is under the shadow of the great God, your shadow will grow stronger. Okay. In amongst the Uganda tribe, and you find this elsewhere as well, the placenta, the afterbirth, okay, when a baby's born, that's deemed to be your twin soul. Okay, it's very much connected with that baby, the soul of the baby. And so it's carefully stored, buried, kept until that person dies. Then it is reunited with the body. Okay, you bring the two souls back together as one. And also around this, there's very common is the idea of the dead as a type of bird soul, excuse me, that the dead, they kind of have wings like a bee or a butterfly, they can fly. And it seems that this then evolves into the idea of angels with wings, excuse me. You have the various ideas associated with all this. I read a story of how in Nepal, there was a yogi who meditated and through meditation could levitate. And then a Buddhist monk, a lama, came up and sliced his shadow with his sword, and immediately the yogi fell to the ground and broke his neck. Right? So you'll have these kinds of, again, a linking that the shadow is like your soul power, right, linked to you. You have a story in the Bible, Samson, who was super, super strong and powerful, but when you cut his hair, whoop, his strength was gone. His soul power was in his hair that gave him super strength. Okay. So you have these sorts of interesting stories. I always find this goes to, yes, hang on here. Oh, no, where am I here? There, that's this one, that's this one. This always moves too quickly for me. Then there's a whole idea of there being a soul power in different body parts, right? And what's so universal is breath, that associated with your breath and breathing is your soul. And so we have many terms for this, in terms of in India, Atma, your soul. It's also tied in with prana, your breath, chi, energy. And in Chinese traditions, it's also breath and energy. Spiritus, anima, pneuma, these are all Greco-Roman words. Ruach is Hebrew word for breath, but it's also tied in with soul. And it's very obvious that when you think of when somebody dies, they stop breathing. Their breath has gone. The breath has expired. And like an expiration date, right? It's like no more of that person. The soul is gone. You have in the Bible and the Genesis account of creation, chapter 2, where God breathes into Adam, which just means man in Hebrew, the first human being. And as he breathed into him, he then becomes a living soul. Otherwise, he's just dust and dirt, matter, right? But his living becomes a living soul because he has the breath of God put into him. And from all this, you get sort of traditions and beliefs. That's why you should put a hand over your mouth whenever you yawn, okay? Because when you yawn, right, your soul is vulnerable through the yawn, and you need to protect yourself from an evil spirit coming in, taking your soul, or even entering you. Same thing with sneezing. When you sneeze, you say, God bless you. It's a form of protection because you're vulnerable when you're, expelling your breath through, yawning or sneezing, right? Kissing is often a ritual for soul connection. And I find it always interesting with animals like dogs and horses. I'm a dog and horse person. That, when they come up, what they do, they want to sniff you and they breathe you in. And ideally, if you want to create a bond, you ideally go nose to nose and exchange breath. Right? And that's how you can develop a bond with an animal, is through the exchanging of breath like that. Then you have all traditions about a kiss of death, and that makes me think of the Harry Potter movies with those, I forget what they're called, those big black dudes that would come along and they would suck out your soul through breath. You get these ideas. So this is something very, very universal, that is connected to your soul. Then you have blood. Okay, that the blood is connected with soul and with the life force that makes up a living being. And that's why blood sacrifice is so worldwide and universal. So in the Bible itself, it says the life is in the blood. And that is what's led to certain sects like the Jehovah's Witnesses. They refuse a blood transfusion because it's believed that if my life is in my blood and so is your life in your blood, to exchange bloods, it's like, my soul is going into yours and yours into mine, that poses real issues. So they refuse to do that. And that's also in the Jewish dietary laws. You don't eat a rare steak. You have all the blood removed from any meat that you would eat. You wouldn't eat it, right? It's seen as though you're eating of the soul of that being. And so then you have the Exodus event, smearing blood on the doorpost so that the angel of death will protect you. Well, the angel of death, when it passes over you, Egypt, right? You have the whole story there in the Bible and the book of Exodus, right? With the Jews under the Egyptians in slavery. And this is one of the plagues that hit, that God sends the angel of death over Egypt, but he tells them to be protected from the angel of death. Smear the blood of a lamb over your doorpost, right? Then you'll be protected. And that's something that continues on in terms of the East, the Dutch, in the East Indies there would develop the ritual of blessing the home by putting blood on the pillars, right? That has its roots in the Exodus tradition. But you also have the idea of, cutting up your hand and shaking with somebody else, you both do it and you exchange blood. You become blood brothers. And it's held that there's a bond of soul, a soul connection between the two of you that are established through that, right? Very similar to this is spit, spitting in your hand, two people doing that, spitting in their hands and handshaking at something. And it's like a soul contract that's been established, that they make this agreement and they're bound to it at the soul level, right? So you have those ideas. And again, this also ties in with the caste system in India, for example, with the untouchables, right? Or the lower caste, Gandhi renamed them the children of God. But that even any contact with their spit or sweat or any bodily fluid, right? That's what's led to the idea of restricting any kind of sharing of meals, all right, or the handling of food of people of lower caste from the upper caste, because there could be this sense of contamination on a soul level that would take place. So these sorts of ideas show up all over the place. And then body organs. That the different parts of the body have a part of you, your soul in it. And this is what has led to headhunters and cannibalism, to get the brain of someone, to get their head and then literally eat the brain. It's like you're getting the power and strength and the soul power of your enemies, right? And so, yeah, and, there's a lot of contemporary research, in terms of organ exchange, when you get a new heart and people having the experience of, having the similar desires of the person that they got the heart transplant from. It's like their personality changes in certain regards. They like different things, different foods, different music, different things start showing up in their life that reflects the personality of the person that they got the organ from. So there's a lot of stuff along that raises the issue. Is there, something of me in my body, what we could call soul in some way, or my consciousness or personality or whatever you want to call it. So you have, to continue on here, Egyptian pyramid texts, they talk about when the pharaoh dies, okay, the dead king, he would eat the innards of the gods in order to get their power, okay. And tied in with this is that the food that you eat, that you should bless it, because there's power, energies in food. And they could be good or it could be bad. And so you want to bless your food to make sure that that energy, that soul energy, that soul stuff, that soul power in the food is going to be good for your body. It will nurture your body. It will bring blessings to you, okay, and not harm you. And that's very interesting. Anyway, I could babble on about all kinds of things here. Anyway, so the soul then, in terms of very ancient times and ancient concepts, is the idea that, we've got these powers and energies associated with different parts of the body and all these sorts of things. But over time, we find the idea that the soul is something that can leave the body, that can somewhat detach from the body. And so it's something that is also beyond the body, external to the body, and is something that might not be affected by death itself, okay? And rather, the idea develops is that death is a type of union between something in me that we could call a type of soul and something that's greater or beyond me as I know myself here in my physical body, something beyond me that also is in some way some aspect of soul that many later will call spirit. Okay, and as we're going to start getting into, eventually into a distinction between spirit and soul and body. Okay, but this is something that kind of evolves over time, and there's some various ideas. So in Egypt, they said to die is to go with one's ka. Okay. When I die, my ka is then more powerful. It's like reconnecting to a higher spirit. In ancient Persia, kind of reflected in the Zoroastrian tradition, the soul known as Urvan reunites with one's spirit or Favashi at death. Okay, that's one's higher self. Borneo tribe, after burial, one's body soul unites with one's soul marrow. Okay, like in the bone marrow, right? So you'll get various references like this. You'll also have, in an obvious from human experience, we humans, we experience the of something within me that is separate from the body that seems to appear in my dreams. Okay, that then in a lot of shamanic traditions, they'll call it the dream body. And as you dream and have the visions and whatnot, that's the dream world. All right, the spirit world, the world of soul, that is held to be far more real than this physical one. Okay, that's very common. And so when you're sick, faint, fall asleep, whatever, there's a potential for soul loss, okay, whenever you lose consciousness. And also at death, you then continue on as soul in some way, right? There's a sense that you continue on beyond the body. But there's not yet a complete dualism, a psychological dualism of the soul as something divine, eternal, and separate and distinct from the body, okay? Nor is there a belief in the immortality of the soul. That is something that's going to develop later on. Rather, what we find in more ancient cultures is this idea that there's a reuniting of aspects of yourself or soul, and then coming into a greater type of soul power and security. Okay, freed from the harm that can affect us here in our physical body. Right. So there's quite a shift that goes on. And so here we find very universal is the idea of a guardian angel. Okay, guardian angel, guide, a higher self, various terms that we use. That is a type of protective spirit, a guide. It's a bit beyond the body, beyond the soul, but also connected to you in some way. So as I mentioned, in Egypt, Ka brings power and protection. I've got a whole slide coming up about all the different concepts in Egypt here in a sec. But very similar to this amongst the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians, the word El. The El was sort of your own personal guardian angel is the best term to use. That was responsible for protecting you, for guiding you, bringing success in your life. Okay, it brought you into being. It's responsible for your existence here. And it could be either a mother or a father type of god or goddess in a sense. It's a type of deity of some kind, or like a spirit angel. Okay. And once it's gone, you get sick. Right? It's very similar like a shamanism with your power animal. But at the time of the Sumerians, Babylonians, it's seen not so much as an animal, but as like a human being type of image. So that you have that reference of El in the Bible. That's the God of Abraham that spoke to him and led him on his journeys, all right, to begin the whole religion of Judaism. And in the Bible, the angel of the Lord seems to be like the El, the personal soul of Yahweh. It's a form of God. It's not a servant of God, but it's like ambiguous. It's kind of referred to as the angel of the Lord, but it's like it's God himself, but God in a particular form. Okay, and it seems like God in the form of, coming to earth as what would be called an angel, but they're often very human-like. So it's interesting stuff. And then, you go into the medieval world in Europe and pagan traditions, it's everywhere about guardian spirits, tons of stuff there. The African tribe here refers to the aklama as protective, okay? It's tied into your destiny, your fate. It's an invisible thing that God has given to man so that may always be around him and accompany him everywhere. My aklama was gracious to me. My aklama has given me sound advice. And so you'll have this kind of language, terminology that's used. Okay, it's like a particular guide. So where am I here? Oops. Yeah, and here we go. So the complexity of soul in most ancient societies, right? It's sort of here just to give you a bit of an idea. The Egyptians, you've got first of all, Ib, the heart, which is the essence of your will, intent, emotion. It will face judgment, okay, judgment day or at death. It is put on the scale. The heart is put on the scale to determine its destiny, if it's going to be eaten or will indeed enter into the afterlife and continue on. Okay, that's the heart. So it's a part of your soul. Shut is the shadow. That carries also a part of you in the shadow. Ren is your name. And it will continue to exist, your soul in the name, if you're remembered, if that name is spoken, if it's written down, if it's protected. Okay. You have a similar idea amongst the ancient Hebrews, that if you're remembered, okay, your name is remembered, you continue to exist. It's almost like in the memory of your ancestors. And that's why it's important to remember your ancestors. So you get, the honoring of ancestors all over the world. Okay, their ongoing existence is dependent upon you remembering them. Okay, Ba in Egypt is the personality. At death, it joins the Ka, and this is in Egyptian hieroglyphics, where you have the image of a human head with a bird body. Okay, that is the Ka. It is your vital essence. It makes you alive in the body, is breathed into you at birth, and is sustained by food, and it needs sustenance at death through offerings. Okay, so again, this idea that you need to nurture your dead ancestors through ongoing offerings. Ak is the intellect. After the death of the body, the Ba and Ka reunite with Ak, the intellect, which is necessary to make the dead alive again on the other side. Okay, and this is where it requires the proper funeral rites. If they're not done properly, okay, you could become a haunting ghost, okay, a haunting spirit that needs help. And a similar idea in ancient China, if you don't take care of your dead ancestors, they become hungry ghosts if they're neglected. Many Malaysian tribes, they hold that you have 7 souls. West Africa tribes, there's a dream soul, a shadow soul, and a bush soul that goes into the wilderness with the animals. And then there's a soul that survives the body at death. Again, in China, there's a part of the soul that goes in the cemetery, another part that goes in the temple, another part that journeys into the underworld. And then when Buddhism comes to China, then that part of the soul can either go to heaven or hell, and then later on reincarnate. So I'm just wanting just to point out how complex things have been in ancient societies in the past in so many ways, all right, about the soul compared to what we think today. Okay, just to be aware of it was way more complex, and this is just to give you a bit of a taste of it. So then what happens here, both East and West, so specifically India and in the Greco-Roman world, things start to change. A dualism starts to clearly emerge here about the soul versus the body. So the soul as living, as a power kind of energy, as being essentially divine, starts to become separated from the body that is seen as something dead and impotent, okay? And there's no divinity within it, all right? We get this kind of dualism of body versus spirit. And Plato plays a key role in, developing this idea. So in the pre-Socratic world, the entire, that's again prior to this, okay, before Socrates, the entire life process, okay, the whole flow of life was seen as divine. And soul was one power among others in the whole life process. It was just an ongoing interconnected flow of soul, right? They're often called world soul. Plato removes the soul from the world and made this material world no longer divine, but something evil, a form of imprisonment where the soul is trapped and in bondage and imprisoned in materiality. And so the goal, okay, and this is what Gnosticism was, a lot of it reflected this, is to seek to release the soul from material existence, to set it free from this evil world of suffering and drudgery. Okay, when you find a similar idea developing over in India, okay? And again, also around the same time, and it could be that they, through interaction, it could be through historical diffusion here, that takes place. But in India, similarly, you get increasingly the idea that the soul is trapped in this material world and it wants to be released from rebirth, from material existence, material desires, and all that develops in India. Okay. And so there you have also that kind of dualism in Prakriti, which is material existence, or sometimes also Ajiva, and Purusha is spirit, okay, or Jiva or soul. You kind of get that dualism developing there in India as well. So what happens is that then the soul starts to be seen as something eternal, okay, eternal in nature, pre-existent. It existed before it came into material body, into material form on this world. That in essence, the soul is heavenly, divine, all right? The divine spark that enters into dead matter and is seeking escape, release, to return to the Godhead, ascend to the heavens, right? To go back to the world of the gods, whereas the body is to return to the dust of the earth. So you get that kind of dualism and separation. And this is, again, very different, right, from more ancient indigenous kind of societies. Uh, so, so the concept of spirit here now develops an element of the soul that gets elevated to a totally non-material entity, okay, is what happens here. And with this, a type of trichotomy develops amongst the Greeks, of it being threefold. There's a body, then there's a soul that's the intermediary, and then spirit. And the soul is what connects the spirit to the body. All right, you get this kind of trajectory, or not trajectory, but a trifold model. So spirit here is not a psychological concept, but is something far more abstract. Okay, it's not just about mind or consciousness. It's something, spirit is something totally out of this world. It is something beyond materiality, beyond any kind of bodily form or mode of being, physical mode of being. Okay, it's never mere life in a biological sense, and above all, it's never mere consciousness in a psychological sense, right? It's totally beyond that. Spirit fundamentally transcends all sense of selfhood, okay, of what you think of as you, with your mind, your consciousness, your personality. It totally transcends that. It is in essence something divine. And that divinity, if anything, is the ground of the soul, but is also distinct and beyond it. Okay. So spirit is pure. It is that divine part of the human being that is of higher impulses, that transcends the soul and the body. Okay, it goes beyond both of them, because the soul is seen as something that has within it contaminants. The soul has thoughts and desires and impulses that really have a more material nature. Okay. So it's not enough for the soul to be released from the body. The soul actually first needs to be purified from the contamination of having been in a body. All right. Because it's the soul through its contamination. This is what kind of also leads into karma, and what brings you back to rebirth is because the soul is so attached to material things that is what pulls the soul back into another incarnation, another incarnation. So the soul needs to be set free from all of that, so that then the spirit is released and there's no more rebirth. Okay. Yeah, that's what needs to happen. And this is what develops here in the teachings, okay, both East and West. So here's where you get the rise of a lot of mystical teachings and mystical spirituality, again, both East and West, where the quest becomes one. And again, this is so different from, in the old days or the older traditions about the afterlife and what the religious goal is. It now becomes increasingly that the goal is a type of union with the divine that involves a form of complete self-annihilation. Okay, the Sufis in mystical Islam, they call it fana, just the annihilation of all sense of self. Buddhism, an emptiness of any own beingness. Okay, shunyata, just pure emptiness. There's a total abandonment of any sense of self. All right, any sense of identity as a separate, distinct thing associated here, right? So that in the end, there's only one being, one reality, God, right? The divine. And so this is an idea that will develop. Okay. And it happens in the Greco-Roman world and also in India. And basically those are the two kind of key centers. So this leads to the paradox that to become empty of self, totally empty of self, one then becomes full of the all. To undo one's identity as self is then to allow for the divine identity to shine through and manifest, that there is only God. Okay. There is no God but God, to use the terminology from the Sufis. To cease to be me allows a becoming of the all. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Okay? When thou art thus not Zippo, God will then become the all within thy soul. So you get these sorts of teachings develop. Okay, so now it's quite a different ballgame, right? Okay, so those are some aspects about the evolution of soul. And I need to emphasize, oh yeah, and here, let me just, yeah, I'm just going to come in here because I do need to bring that up too. Okay, now tied in with this a bit too, in terms of understanding this a bit more, is the experience of ecstasy. See, because what we see in the history of religion is the induction of altered states of consciousness through various means. A lot of it through, say, the use ingestion of plant substances and other kinds of things of going into trance states and whatnot. And in having those experiences of ecstasy that's induced like this through these different techniques, that allows for a temporary release, a sense of the self being set free from the body and all of the suffering and material limitations that being physically embodied brings. One then gets a glimpse of a whole nother world, a whole nother experience of the self as totally free from physicality. Okay, a state of being of where there is no body, but something utterly transcendent, potentially cosmic and divine. And so the result is the idea that the soul's destiny must then be one to become free from the body and all the difficulties of physicality, where you're in pain, you get tired, your body breaks down, and the suffering that physicality brings and the limitations that physicality brings is like, no, you have a taste of transcending that. And it's like having then tasted from the cup of immortality. Immortality, that there is something within the self that is immortal, that can be set free from this physical domain and physical existence. So that, of course, leads to the whole idea of the immortality of the soul. Right? That in the end, the long run, the self is not overtaken by death and physical corruption and limitations of the body, but will be set free from it. Okay. Okay. So, for example, there's an American tribe, South American tribe, that they have this saying that by dancing into trance, you journey to the land of no evil, where one can become light enough to walk on water, which is interesting. And that's all very interesting, because that's a whole nother thing there too. That through these kinds of trance states, people develop superpowers, the siddhis of the yogis and siddhas, I should say, that all this takes place. It's all these connections that happen. That these are all possible. So the use of plant substances, right, that can induce these altered states, it's like, this is the beverage of the gods. This is what made them immortal, right? As you see this in the Vedic text about talking about the god Indra. That's how Indra became immortal. He drank soma, he ingested soma. And so it's possible to enter into this world of immortality. Now, what's interesting is how it's a bit of a different story in China. Okay, and the Chinese tradition, they did not emphasize the separation of the soul from the body, the way you get that developing in India, and in India and within the Greco-Roman world. Okay, that didn't really develop there. It got introduced by Buddhism later on. Okay, but it really was not there. Okay, they held to more the ancient beliefs of there being different parts of the soul that go to different places and things like that. And so because that kind of dualism didn't develop in China, what's so interesting is that they also have the experience of immortality, but there's a seriously long tradition that develops in China that feeds into Chinese medicine and Qigong and Tai Chi and all that stuff, is that it's possible to attain physical immortality, that you make this body live forever, right? So they didn't have this separation, this kind of dualism, and between soul and body, and therefore immortality of the soul as something separate from the body. It's like, no, man, we're going to take this whole thing along with us. This babe is going along for the ride. Physical immortality. So that's really, I find that quite interesting. Okay. So anyways, just to be aware of some of those connections and distinctions. Did I skip a slide? Yes, I did. No, where am I here? Hang on here. Experience of ecstasy. Whoops, see, I went too fast. There we go. Now you also have then what develops in the, especially the Greco-Roman world, and it's very much a part of the Western traditions, is the idea of the ascension of the soul going through several levels. And this is going to lead to that there's so many levels of heaven, so many levels of hell, and that there's a journey of going through all of these levels. We find it already going back to Babylonian myths of Ishtar, journeying to the underworld. And as she goes down each level of this, going into the underworld, she leaves a portion of clothing behind at each gate. Okay. And it's like releasing a certain aspect of self-identity, right? In order to become then eventually pure spirit, to be released from them. And you'll find this idea really getting fleshed out in a lot of esoteric kind of teachings in the West. This idea of a cosmic journey through 7 planetary spheres, because again, this is where the 7 comes from, is, you've got the sun, the moon, the various planets that they made up. It was seen as being several spheres that surround the planet Earth that you make your journey through. And once you make it through the 7 planetary spheres, you get to the highest, which is the 8th, which is the realm. That's where God is. That's the imperial realm. Okay. The earth is the lowest, and you want to get up to the 8th. So that's something that got very much popularized in the Greco-Mediterranean world, Greco-Roman world, and then of course Neoplatonism. You'll see this in Mithras as a mystery religion and others. And so, yeah, in the Mithras tradition, they had that you travel through 7 gates made of different metals, each guarded by a different kind of angel, and the soul must discard clothing of a certain passion at each one until they get to the naked at the 8th one, which is the heaven of bliss. And that is where divinity is pure light, pure fire. Okay. So that kind of will make up sort of, and it's interesting that you discard the clothing of certain passions. And that's kind of, it seems to feed into, Dante's Inferno of the different levels and the various sins in the Catholic tradition, and even in Islam, they have, we'll see, I'll have some pictures coming up of these things. They'll have different levels, how they're identified. Now, one thing that's interesting, in the Hebrew biblical tradition, okay, in terms of Judaism, the ancient Judaism, the religion of ancient Israel, and they very much feared equating humans with the divine in any kind of a way. So there is always emphasized that humans are a creature created by God, and that eternal life is a gift granted by God. So God gives both life here physically, okay, in this physical body now, but God also gives that life eternally in the hereafter. So it's not about just naturally having some kind of immortal soul that you'll just automatically continue to exist in, okay? Instead, there's a resurrection of the body because you are a body soul, a living soul, right? And then through the resurrection, it's like it's a new creation on God's part by God's power. God raises you from the dead. Right? And God is the one that gives you eternal life. It is not something that you intrinsically have in your nature. It is all seen as a gift of God. That's sort of a bit of an emphasis that you get there. So, so the body, just for me to read here, the body is a living soul, and together makes up one's essential nature, so that the body is not abandoned, not renounced. Did I skip the asceticism somewhere? I did. Oh, I needed to. I don't think so. Oh, darn. I skipped this earlier. Okay, I got to get back to this, okay? Because that's why you'll understand this. See, this goes too fast. I hate this thing. So where was I here? So the concept of soul here is amongst the Hebrew is more in line with more primal societies than it was with the Greek dualism that developed. Okay, humans are not just a soul in a body, but a body soul together that can't be just so easily separated. It's like the body is an extension of the soul. And they contain that. Remember those old ideas of the soul, and like in your organs and this part and that part and the blood and all that and your breath, all that is like, no, you are a living soul, body, soul together. And so you just don't get split. So that's why there's a resurrection of the body. Okay, that's emphasized here, that becomes a part of the Jewish and then Christian and then Muslim tradition. Okay, and so just to be aware of that. So humans are not just spirits that automatically will live forever, but instead they have spirit as a divine gift from God. It is a gift that of God himself bringing that to you. God breathed into Adam and became a living soul. So that's where it's a bit different from the Greek concept of a body, soul, and spirit. It was just a given that you automatically have that. So let me just go back here to what I skipped that one slide, when I talked about this dualism that develops in the Greco-Roman world, right? And how the soul is, you get this, matter is evil, and the soul is separate from that will seeks release from this material world. And as I mentioned, that leads into the concept of spirit that develops, that threefold of body, soul, and spirit, but that the soul has contaminants in it, right? That you need to purify the soul. Well, that's what's going to lead to asceticism. And let me just make sure I don't miss it again here. Yeah, this is what happens both amongst the Greeks this time and also in India, where the body now loses its value. The body is seen as a tomb, a form of bondage of the soul. And you have to get rid of this body, die to this body in order to live in spirit. And so they start calling for self-renunciation. You need to renounce all physical desires, totally disidentify with the body, right? And this is what you see very much strongly in Indian tradition, in Hinduism, right? And then also Buddhism and all that develops over in India. So asceticism then begins as a spiritual practice to having to purify the body. The body is just a vehicle for the soul spirit, but in order to progress, you have to purify the soul of material contamination, material influence. So anything material in terms of desires and impulses, thoughts, concepts, attachments, they all have to disappear. One is to become purified and be totally God-centered, God consciousness, God focused. It's no longer I who live, but only God. Okay, empty of all self. Polish the soul, like remove all the dross that covers the soul, all the contaminants over it. You got to clear it all off. So just the spirit, pure spirit will shine, that light will shine. And this becomes very much a part of the Sufi tradition. As I mentioned earlier, fana, self-annihilation, a lot of various ascetic practices that are there in the Christian tradition, but it's not really there in the Jewish tradition in ways, but it's somewhat in Christianity, very much amongst the Sufis, more strongly there, and some Christian mystical traditions, very strongly in India. Okay, you get this, right? Is to become empty of all ego, sense of self, and only filled with the divine spirit. Okay, and whoops, so here, yeah, so then I went into the mysticism, right? Yeah, so I just unfortunately skipped that one slide, so hopefully that doesn't mess you up too much. So that's what is the basis then of this mystical spirituality of self-annihilation, emptiness, etc., etc. Okay, all right, so that was that. Well, let me kind of go forward. I did this ecstasy, that whole experience, and the ascension of the soul through these spheres and levels. And this is where, the Hebrew tradition was contrary to that. It held that, no, we are a body soul together. You don't have to purge this body or purge the soul of any kind of physicality. It's like, it's good to be physical. It's good to be, we're created by God, and it's good. It's good to be in the body. It's a part of God's creation to be in the body. And the spirit, that is a gift from God. So it's not about me purifying the body in order to release the spirit from the body when I die. Okay, that's not a part of the Jewish spiritual path or tradition. Okay, but yet I have to say the whole Greco-Roman idea strongly influenced the Western traditions, and aspects of, certain schools of thought, perhaps in Judaism, not as much, but definitely more so in Christianity and definitely in Islam. You'll see this at play amongst mystical teachings. So I had a feeling I wanted to say something more about this here. Anyway, yeah, because that becomes an issue. Is how do you view this world? How do you view physicality? What value does the physical part of human experience have to play in the larger picture of the religious journey, the spiritual journey? Does it have a role to play? Is materiality, physicality, simply an obstacle that needs to be overcome? Does it have no inherent value in and of itself? How do you view the physical body, right? And the physical aspect of reality. Is it entirely evil? And it's unfortunate. Well, I think it's unfortunate that kind of dualism has been pretty prevalent in ways, and there's some, negative things that come out of that. Okay, so where are we here? Yeah, now talking about place. Where does the soul go to? Realms of soul in the afterlife. Well, there's a sense of a place where the soul resides, both in this world and in the beyond. Okay, and again, going way back in ancient times, and it says, in this world, generally there's a sense that there are these mysterious, magical places, they kind of spooky places, and that people have felt that somehow they are portals. They are the places that connect us to the underworld, the realm of the dead. There's usually, these are places that have a sense of otherworldliness, a sense of mystery around them. Could be certain islands, certain mountains, certain forests, certain caves, misty kind of dark places. All right, that there's a bit of an uncanny feeling about them, and they develop a reputation that this is where the dead live. This is the abode of the dead. All right. Often they're abandoned, isolated places that seem to be kind of lifeless. Like there are certain lakes where there's no birds, or bogs, where all the trees are dead here in this spot, or deserts where there's just no life grows here. Well, that's where these spirits of the dead live, is where there's no life. Okay. So you get these places, physical places that seem to be, are deemed to be the portals, the place where you could go and more easily connect with the dead in these places. Then there's also a sense in terms of day and night, that at nighttime, there's also a portal to the beyond. And so you've got this, talk about the witching hour, right? And that, generally, and it's interesting that it seems that it's usually around 3 a.m. or so, that the portal, the veil between this world and the spirit world is thinnest. It's easier to, we more easily have dreams and get inspirations, revelations at night in our sleep at around that time. And that's why a lot of spiritual traditions and monastic kind of traditions, they get up that around 3 o'clock and start their prayers, all right, or their chanting or meditations, because it's like you're just a bit more open at that point. It's like a portal in time. Okay. Then there's also this sense of sunsets and sunrises. We see this especially like with the Egyptians, how they built their great cities of the dead. They built them in the west, and in the east was where the heavens resided, with a tree of life that the gods would sit in and eat the fruit of that tree of life, and that is what would nourish the dead. Okay, so you get this kind of sense of where the sun is associated with the sun, that's associated with life even in the afterlife. Also a sense of the distant past, and this is also interesting, is that once upon a time, long time ago, was paradise. And that's where the gods lived back then. In fact, the gods would come down and hang out with us. We mere mortals could talk to the gods, communicate with them, hang out with them. All right, they came to earth. It was paradise. And back then, life was easy. There was no evil. There were no storms, no disease, no suffering. There was just pure abundance. All right. So you got this idea that once upon a time in the past, it was like a portal that existed where the gods could come to us more easily. Whereas today it's hard. We're living in the dark age where it's difficult to become spiritual, right? These are dark times. So you get all that kind of language here. So there's a lack of connection. The portals are narrow and difficult to find. Okay. So anyway, these are just all kinds of ideas here associated with this. Uh, so the underworld was largely seen as being in the earth, okay, as a shadowy, dark place under the earth, literally. That at death, that's where you go. You return to the womb of the mother of life, Mother Earth. Uh, the Egyptians held that at night, the heavens that were rotating around the earth, okay, as the planets and stars move around at night, that the heavens then were rotating underneath the earth and going beneath it. And so as the sun was visiting us now and was leaving us, the sun was then visiting the world of the dead underneath us, okay, and kind of making its circle around us. All right. But the underworld was seen as a type of counter heaven. It was a land of shadows and gloomy, but not seen as separate from heaven. Okay. You didn't have that sense of harsh separation. That develops more over time because it wasn't really a hell the way the idea that develops later on. Okay. It was just kind of a shadowy, gloomy place, not as nice as here, generally speaking, but then it gets embellished later. Over time, as time went on, heaven became more and more exclusively the place for the gods and the blessed dead, those who are lucky to be able to go where the gods are, a place of pleasure and well-being, and not gloomy, okay, not gloomy. And you'll see this like in India, right, with the concept of the house of clay, just a shadowy, dark underworld. But then there was the house of the ancestors, where they lived with the gods and they could feast with the gods, and it was wonderful up there. Whereas the clay house of clay, it wasn't anything great. It's under the, it wasn't a place of torment and torture. Okay, which is, yeah, not that great, but up there with the gods, that was a place to be. So yeah, so the thing is that the earth bears fruit, it creates new life, but in the underworld, there is no bearing of life. Okay. The life only happens here on earth where there's fruit that's born. And then there's total pleasure and ongoing riches in heaven. So over time, as the concept of spirit develops and has no real concrete, yeah, this is what happens. Over time, okay, this whole concept of spirit, it develops more and more, but there's no real concrete qualities or features about spirit, okay? It's increasingly stripped of anything material, any kind of descriptors that we can relate to that belongs of this world. It becomes more and more empty of any kind of descriptors, more and more transcendent. And so at that peak, the height of it really is when we see it in Buddhism, where it's held that cosmology becomes psychology in Buddhism. When you become enlightened, it's not about getting up to heaven to be with the gods in this paradise. No, to become enlightened isn't so much cosmology of going to a place like a heaven, rather is becoming the psychology that there is no me. There is no longer Linda Christensen, no self. There's only pure emptiness, nirvana, which is beyond descriptors, beyond description. It's, you can't even say anything much about it. It's so beyond, it's so totally transcendent. And this is where the journey goes, right? It's very interesting how, again, just getting that broader picture of the evolution of some of these ideas here about the self, the soul, the heavens, the afterlife. Okay, there's really quite the journey that takes place. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in here, I just put in some pictures here. You've got the ancient Hebrew conception of the universe as a picture that the way it's described in terms of the biblical tradition is you've got God way up there in the heaven of heavens. And then you've got sort of heavens below that. And then there's a sense of the waters above the firmament, above the sky. That's where the rain comes from. Okay. And then you've got the planets and the sun and the moon and clouds. Then the earth, as you can see there. And then the foundations of heaven are sort of planted like on the ocean. And you've got the earth. And then there's the underworld, okay, under the earth. And below that was seen as the great deep, like the sense of depths of water. And that's where Leviathan, Rahab, these sort of like serpent type creatures lived in. Okay. So you've got that. And then, yeah, that's sort of the old view there in terms of the Hebrew tradition and the way it's described in the Bible. That's sort of the model. And then later on, you've got seven heavens becomes a very common thing. You've got there just a sort of a painting of that in terms of that becomes popular in the Christian tradition. Okay, seven heavens. Whoops. You also get that in terms of Islam, seven heavens. Whoops. And then you also get that there are several levels of hell. And these are just two. They're both reflecting the Muslim view of seven levels of hell. And you could just kind of read them. I kind of got two different versions up just so you can clearly kind of compare and read if ever you want to here to get a bit of an idea that there's different levels of hell for different people, different types of sinners, if they be Jewish, Christian, what have you, pagan, infidels, what have you, they go to different places. Okay, so these are different levels of hell. And they also, again, there's 7 levels of heaven became very widespread throughout the Western world. Okay, yeah. And then Dante in his Dante's Inferno, right, he then fleshed it out to be 9 levels of hell. Okay, and again, remember how I mentioned earlier with Mithras cult, how different as you make your journey through, you need to get rid of different different traits or vices in various ways. You need to kind of get rid of them as you make your journey through. And so this is what Dante had put together in his little, his piece of work. And then here to the left is from Jainism, the religion of Jainism in India, which I've just sort of found a picture of 7 levels of hell. Okay, so there you also have different levels of hell, different types of punishment for different people, depending on how bad your karma is. Okay. So, and then in Buddhism later on, especially it goes in China there's usually 10 levels of hell. So you'll get this, just things get embellished more and more as time goes on of all these different levels of hell and different types of punishment and whatnot. Okay. It's interesting how it just becomes more complex that way. Yeah, that does. The soul gets simplified, but the heavens and hells get complicated. So the soul's destiny, quite widespread, are various rituals to assist the soul in transition, okay, the journey of the dead. It's so important to do proper rituals after a person has died so that the soul is victorious in attaining the ideal place, the ideal situation in the afterlife. So the Egyptians developed the Book of the Dead. The Tibetans have their Book of the Dead, many shamanic traditions, Catholic rites of masses for the dead. You've got various practices here, okay? So, but you'll find here, there is the idea that you get a passport, like in Egypt, they'll be given a passport, a document that guarantees their entry to the home of the gods. In China, a shaman instructs a woman, here's a quote I got from a text: as soon as thou receivest this passport, thou must prepare to set out for the place of the blessed, where thou mayest expect great bliss and peace. But you got to have your passport. And that's why part of the rituals involve, that the priests involved usually have the expertise to provide you with the proper passport to make sure you have a good afterlife. Many see heaven as a paradise where the gods live. I made reference to the Egyptian tree of life. And you have the tree of life in the book, in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, and also in the book of Genesis. That is the destiny in the end, is the tree of life. That could be tied in with the cosmic tree that you get in shamanic traditions all over the world. That is where in Egypt they say that's where the dead sit and receive the food of eternal life from the goddess of heaven, Nut. Okay, so that's where they receive the gift of eternal life. In Christianity, it'd say Christ is the one that gives you eternal life. And that's what the tree of life represents there in the biblical tradition. Mostly it's seen as being similar to earthly life, but it's long and good. Concept of eternity develops later. Some hold that you can die a second death there, and some from there you can reincarnate. So you'll have different ideas in different places. Yoruba, Africa, a place in this world is better than that of the spirits. Often a shadowy house of clay dust is their food. In Sheol, the dead can't even worship God. You find in the early period that, the afterlife wasn't anything that great. And you're better off here is a common theme in a lot of ancient traditions. Okay. So anyway, but then over time, the heavens become more and more attractive. Yeah, and this is one thing is the idea is that your experience in the afterlife will be determined by how you lived in this life. And a key thing is your potency in this life. The more power, energy, mana that you have in this life, that will bring you more in the next. So what you create in this life will be amplified in the next. So if you're a mighty warrior, you're going to have then a more glorious afterlife. There's a potential that you could become a type of deity. And they blatantly say this in China, for example. But warriors, hunters, childbearers, especially if you die while manifesting your power by doing something like being at war or hunting or giving birth to a child, you'll then are more fortunate than those who don't. Is held that the energy tied in with that is going to ensure you a higher place in some way, a higher social status, something better for you in the afterlife because of that. So those of nobility here on earth, of a higher social status, they then will have a greater power in the afterlife as well. Excuse me. Along with also the type of death that you have has a certain potency. So if there's some kind of tragedy, if you die by drowning or snake bite, that will then elevate you to some kind of divine status or as a hero of some kind. In Egypt, that's very common. In China, the goddess Matsu, she was like a virgin girl that drowned, and she then was elevated to be the queen of heaven. So you'll find this type of thing happening. And then like Confucius, very famous on earth, so contributed to society and culture and moral virtues in society. So he's elevated in the afterlife because of what he all manifested in this life, right? So you'll have that kind of connection in again, ancient times, right? And then correlated with that, sin decreases the power of both the living and the dead. You'll find this in certain Taoist traditions and other traditions that sin will cost you. It will, you'll have a shorter lifespan because of sin. It will bring curses to you, bad things to you. It just, it decreases your power, right? And it's not so much about a fear of punishment and hope and reward, okay, in the afterlife, as it is about this kind of power and energy that you really live with full power, and you can take that into the afterlife in some way, right? It's all about how you really show up. And that then gets turned into the idea of karma. That then gets turned into the idea that you're, punished or rewarded by God and judged type of idea, right? But initially it's all, think of it as the energy involved in these, in your actions and how you lived. And then Buddhism, again, representing kind of the peak of where things end up going. If you want to look at it just strictly in terms of evolution of ideas here, the history of ideas, Buddhism is no longer about seeking or acquiring any kind of afterlife or power, energy, force, or whatever, but simply to transcend both being and non-being. So in Buddhism, fundamentally, when you get into Mahayana Buddhism and the doctrine of emptiness and what even the Buddha taught, that no soul, anatma, these things, nirvana, what that all entailed, is there isn't anything there really offered in terms of fundamentally the destiny of the soul. Okay. And yeah, Buddhism is a big topic. Okay. But But even that's blatantly where it goes with those who teach and are really into it, okay, Buddhism in a serious way. But for the masses who embrace Buddhism, it's like, oh, no, no, no. I just want to get up there into the heavens with the bodhisattvas, so I can know I can have a nice heavenly life. And then from there, I'll go to nirvana. So for the masses, it's like they just don't relate to this. Okay. They still want to believe that there's a soul, that they will continue on, that there's life after death, and it's going to be good for them. That's what people want to believe, and they're very attached to that. But Buddhism is radical in contradicting that, really, or trying to transcend that altogether. Okay. Oh, I think that's it. Okay. This is the end. Okay, good. All right. Well, there you go. Wow. So there's a lot here, a lot of ideas, in terms of the whole evolution of the concept of the soul in different places and parts, and the afterlife, how that kind of all can evolve. Just trying to introduce you to the variety of ideas and concepts, that it's quite different from when you just study world religions a little bit. Things are somewhat simplified. There's a lot of reductionism that takes place, reduced to just this and just that, okay, and packaged. And it's nice and neat and tidy because that's what people like. They like it simple, like it black and white. But if you take the bigger picture in terms of the history of religious ideas, which is what we're doing here, it's a little bit more complicated, and there's a lot of variety here. And it's quite different from what a lot of people would think. All right. So anyways, hopefully you found this interesting and of some benefit. Okay. All right. That's it for now.